everyone, and welcome back to Amity Bloom. My name is Nazi, and today's video is all about tales from my journal. This is a series that I started last year around October, around Halloween time, and it's a time when I open up my journal and I write down some of the unexplained, paranormal, unknown stories that have occurred within my life, to family members, those tales that we're sometimes scared to tell, scared to document, scared to write down, but they become tattoos in our life. They become experiences that change us in some way. If you're someone like me who really likes scary stories and you love hearing about the unknown, then I invite you to turn your page and let's journal about the tales of our journal together. When journaling about unknown experiences, I tend to struggle a little bit with choosing my ephemera. However, for this particular journal process, I decided to create my own ephemera, which can be found in my shop, but I wanted to stick to vintage colors, some deeper, richer tones, and also incorporating florals and beautiful papers. Ever since I was little, my mother would tell me stories of my great-grandfather. He was the first one in our family that was open and was able to experience the paranormal. My great-grandfather had the soul of someone who was able to communicate with those who have passed. With spirits, he was able to see them, but this gift that he was given to be able to see things that others couldn't, and to be able to hear things and communicate with those that have passed, he sometimes saw it as a curse. One of the stories that my mother told me of my great-grandfather is that when he would come home from work, and this was back in 1935, at nighttime, the hardworking men would start walking home to get back to their families. And during some nights, strange things would occur. People would go missing, and then they'd appear again. They knew the roads, they knew how to get home, but sometimes they would end up getting lost. Creepy things would happen. They'd continue walking and they'd end up going in a circle, or they would be on a bicycle or by foot and they'd end up in a stream. They'd end up in weird places that they weren't familiar with. Now, where the story gets a little bit creepy is that all of these occurrences were said to be associated with witches, with people that would practice really unnatural things, and they would purposely make these men and women get lost on their travels and on their way home. And whenever these occurrences would happen to my great-grandfather, he would grab his medallion and his rosary. He would hold it in his hand, and he would put a medallion, a coin, in his mouth, and he would hold onto it in his mouth. And he would walk through the path, praying in his head, holding his rosary, and he would miraculously find his way back home. And by putting the medallion in his mouth, he was able to communicate. It's a really uncommon and weird story, but to this day, my great-grandfather was someone that never lied. He had no reason to, and everyone in the village knew him as this special soul. I decided to take a playing card and turned it into a pocket, and in order to journal on top of it, I used one of my vintage labels that I have, as well as some pretty scrapbook paper, turned it into a tag to give me some more journaling space. Using the most of the area that you have, especially if you're working in a traveler's notebook that's a little bit more narrow, it makes you appreciate your ephemera for both a functional and a beautiful use as well as decoration. So now I'm taking a little bag that I have that has this beautiful vintage script on it. It reminded me of like an antique newspaper, and I wanted to give my antique wallpaper, that little circle punch out of some wallpaper, a backing to it to make it stand out, kind of like a frame. And the newspaper print was too busy, so I decided to stick to this gray scrapbook paper that I loved, and I thought I'd frame it myself, give it a nice border to make it stand out. The unexplained occurrences did not stop with my great-grandfather. They continued to my mother. She would go to sleep, and when she would wake up, She would hear her name being whispered in her ear, and she would see a fog over her bed of colors, like rainbow colors, floating across her bed. She knew what she was seeing wasn't normal. And I believe it was 15 years ago. I remember my mother waking up and screaming, and she saw scratch marks on her jeans. And we didn't have any pets at this time. No one would do this to my mom, none of my siblings, my dad, and it was just a really scary moment. And this was actually during the time that we experienced some paranormal things occurring in our home. If you watched last year's Tales from My Journal, which I will link below, then you know about the stories that have occurred. But my mother, to this day, she tends to have the home with really good energy. No scary movies. There's always lights turned on. She has my great-grandfather's rosary next to her bed, and the occurrences have stopped happening. When journaling on top of a book page, or a page that already has the designer writing on top of it, I like to collage some writing space. The first thing that I usually like to do is give a border to my writing area. So at the bottom, I'm taking some vintage scrapbook paper, adding it to give myself a design since I am going to be covering up most of the words and phrases. Then I'm taking some vintage writing paper, gluing it right on top, connecting both the script and the decorative paper, and at the very top adding an ephemera piece to give my page a title for the date, and then I am adding a black border around my writing area to bring more focus to it. Now, just how these paranormal happenings occurred with my great-grandfather, they occurred with my mother, lots of my family members, and they have also occurred with myself. When I was little, we lived in a one-bedroom room back in Mexico, and I vividly remember the floor was tiled. It was this mosaic tiled floor, and it reminded me of the antique wallpaper that I put in my journal. And I put this wallpaper in my journal to kind of use as ephemera to remember that floor of where we used to live, because it's very important in the story because of how much it impacted my memory. Whenever I think of these memories, I think of that tiled floor and my little box. In this box, I had marbles that my parents bought for me that I would play with. Now, I loved playing with my marbles, and to this day, I play marbles with my dad. And I would always open my box, take out my marbles, play with them, and I'd throw them with my finger. And when I was done playing with my marbles, I would pick them up and put them back in my box. Well, one night, I was playing by myself in the room. I opened up my box of marbles, and there were no marbles in my box. And I remember I thought maybe my mother took them from me or someone in my family hid them from me. And I remember as I was looking for them, I heard something rolling across the floor. I sat down on the floor, I turned my head, and in the corner underneath my mother's desk, I saw a marble being rolled back to me. At first, I thought it was probably our cat or someone in the room just playing with me, my dad. I remember getting up, going towards my mother's desk, and there was no one there. Now, because I was so little, of course, I didn't initially get really scared. I was just confused. And I remember picking up my marble and just being happy that I found it and putting it back in my box. However, more marbles started coming from that same area over and over again. I'd sit back down on the floor and a marble would roll back to me from my mother's desk. I thought I was playing a game. I knew I was playing a game with someone, but because I was so little, my mind didn't perceive. Little did I know I ended up playing a game of marbles with something that was in that room. It wasn't a person, it wasn't an animal, it wasn't a living thing. And all I remember is my mother opening the door and seeing me playing marbles with someone that wasn't there. And I remember ever since then, she never left me play by myself in that room anymore. To this day, I kept my box where my marbles would be kept. I will never put marbles in this box again. I actually have some Peerless watercolors in here, as I know they won't be rolled back to me, but that was definitely the first occurrence that I ever experienced of something that was unknown, of an energy that was there that you couldn't see. But even though that is one of the scariest memories that I can remember when I was little, I still try to see it in a positive outlet, and I still try to document it in my books, in my journals, even though it is something that makes you anxious or that makes you scared. All of these scenarios, whether it's my great-grandfather's stories back in 1937, or my mother's stories when she was 17 years old, or my stories when I was 3 years old, they all should be recorded. They all should be remembered. They're a part of who you are, and they're part of your life's experiences. And so my challenge for you all is tell your own stories and your tales from your journal. Pick a page in your journal and document perhaps a moment in time that you felt uneasy, that you felt scared, that you couldn't explain, and document it in a way that makes you happy, that you can associate positivity with it. And the way that I decided to do it is, instead of focusing on skulls and ghosts and, really depressing papers and ephemera, I decided to use florals. And I brought in tones of black, as we tend to associate black with scary things. I used those colors, but I incorporated florals in them. And I used my own printable that's in my shop right now to give it more of a vintage kind of aesthetic. Yeah, it's still modern and it still feels like me, and I can flip through these pages and see this antique wallpaper and remember that tiled floor, because even though I did have some scary occurrences, there's still so many beautiful memories, and I want to document everything. So I encourage all of you to take some time today or this weekend and open up a page in your journal and document a moment in your life that you can't explain, that was a little bit scary, and document it and tell your own tale from your own journal, from your own life. If you guys have any paranormal or creepy stories as well, definitely leave them in the comments below, as I always love hearing everyone's stories and it's really intriguing to me. And I think it's really awesome that we have a space where we can share it and also document it in a slightly less creepy way as well, which is good. So, of course, until next time, I hope that you guys have an incredible day, night, wherever you are in the world. And of course, until next time, I hope that you guys have a beautiful day full of positivity, full of peace, light, and love. I will talk to you guys very soon. Bye-bye, and have a good day.